Hey, can I tell you something wild? Like genuinely terrifying? This actually happened just days ago. Picture this. Early January 2026. A country of about 85 million people just vanished. Not physically, digitally, gone from the internet. One moment, protest videos were streaming live from the streets. Thousands of people marching together, shouting, demanding change. Real stuff. And then, static. Nothing. Like someone just pulled the plug on an entire nation. Can you even imagine that happening here? I'm talking about Iran. And what happened there asks us a question we've never really had to answer before. Is internet access a basic human right? Like truly universal? Or is it just a privilege that depends on where you're born? Stick with me on this one, because the answer, it's way more complicated than you'd think. And it involves countries you wouldn't expect. All right, let's rewind a bit. Late December 2025. Iran. Things weren't great economically. Actually, things were pretty terrible for regular people. Prices were skyrocketing. The currency was tanking. Basic stuff, bread, cooking oil, medicine, suddenly cost way more than people could afford. So people started protesting, not about politics at first, just about survival. We can't feed our families kind of protests, you know? Small gatherings at first, workers, shop owners, regular folks in different cities, nothing too organized, just people who'd had enough. Here's the thing, though. At this point, the government wasn't too worried. They'd seen this before. Economic complaints, manageable, controllable. But then something changed, and this is where it gets really interesting. The protests started spreading. Fast, like really fast. By early January, this wasn't just about bread prices anymore. The protest hit Tehran, then other major cities, and the chants, they evolved, started as "we want lower prices," became "the government is responsible." Then, the whole system needs to change. You see the escalation, and here's what really terrified the government. Social media. People were sharing protest locations, times, and videos in real time. Organizing instantly. Think about it. Before the internet, if you wanted to organize a protest, you needed weeks. Phone trees, flyers. Now, one viral post. Done. So the government started getting nervous, real nervous, because this wasn't just people in the streets anymore. It was people connected to each other. And connected people? Way harder to control, way harder to lie to, way harder to make disappear. You feel where this is going? Early January. The government's response shifted. More police, more security forces, more arrests. Standard authoritarian playbook stuff, right? But here's what's crazy. Something else started happening too. Something most people didn't even notice at first. The internet started getting weird. Mobile data got slower. Certain websites wouldn't load. Videos took forever to upload. People thought it was just technical problems. Bad service. But it wasn't technical problems. The government was testing something, seeing how much they could restrict without people fully realizing what was happening. It's like slowly turning down the lights in a room. Do it gradually enough and people's eyes adjust. They don't notice the darkness coming. Creepy, right? But here's the thing. It gets worse. Way worse, because this was just the warm-up. The real blackout? That came next. Early January. Something happened that changed everything. The protest videos started going global. Fast. International media picked them up, and the world began watching Iran. Iranian diaspora communities started protesting too. Los Angeles, London, Toronto, Berlin. Solidarity rallies everywhere. The world was watching Iran. Human rights organizations started issuing statements. Governments started making concerned noises. International pressure was building, and the Iranian government? Panicking. See, this is the moment researchers call the political threshold. It's when a government stops seeing protests as a social problem and starts seeing them as a threat. And once that switch flips, everything changes. The government stops thinking about managing complaints, starts thinking about survival. Their survival? But here's what's key to understand. The government realized the real threat wasn't the people in the streets. Want to know what it was? The real threat was the connection, the videos, the real-time documentation, the ability for the whole world to see what was happening. Think about it. You can disperse a crowd. You can arrest leaders, but how do you fight information? How do you stop millions of witnesses? And so, one night in early January 2026, they made a decision that would affect 85 million people. They pulled the plug, not just slower internet, not just blocked websites, a sweeping blackout. Mobile data, mostly gone. Home internet, largely down. Some channels still worked, but the country felt cut off. Imagine waking up one morning and your phone just doesn't connect to anything. Not Instagram, not WhatsApp, not Google, nothing. How would that feel? For most of us, that would be frustrating, annoying. But in Iran, at that moment, it was terrifying because nobody knew what was happening anymore. Rumors spread by word of mouth. They arrested 50 people on Vali Asr Street. Someone died in Shiraz. But nobody could verify anything. And outside Iran, the rest of the world was left staring at a void. One day, videos were flooding out. The next day, near silence. An information vacuum. This is what researchers call invisibility as power. When a government can make itself invisible to outside observation, it can do almost anything. Because here's the dark truth. Violence is easiest when no one's watching. Accountability requires documentation, and they just killed documentation. Okay, let's step back for a second. Because this isn't just an Iran thing, this is actually a well-documented strategy used by governments around the world. Researchers have studied this extensively, and they've identified three main reasons why authoritarian governments cut internet during protests. Ready? Reason number one, mobilization disruption. Modern protests aren't organized by a few leaders with megaphones, they're organized through networks. Digital networks? Cut the network and suddenly thousands of angry individuals become just that. Individuals. They can't coordinate where to meet, when to march, what to do. It's like cutting the nervous system of a protest movement. The body parts are still there, but they can't communicate with each other anymore. Reason number two, documentation suppression. This one's darker. What can't be recorded can't be proven. What can't be proven never officially happened. No viral videos of police violence, no documented proof of mass arrests, no evidence that could ever be used in an international court. Studies have shown something chilling. Internet shutdowns don't reduce violence. They just make violence invisible. Think about what that means for a second. And reason number three, narrative control. If citizens can't share their version of events, guess whose version becomes the official truth? The government's, obviously. Popular uprising? No, foreign-backed terrorism. Peaceful protesters? Actually violent rioters. See how that works? There's actually a term for all this. Researchers call it digital authoritarianism, and it's becoming one of the defining features of 21st century politics. It's basically this: using digital technology not to liberate people, but to control them. Surveillance, censorship, shutdowns, all working together as a system. Remember when we thought the internet would automatically spread democracy? That was so naive. Turns out the internet is just a tool, and tools are neutral. Authoritarian governments learn to use that tool too. Not just to spy on people, but to shape reality itself. To decide what can be known. So here's Iran in January 2026. 85 million people cut off from the world. The government free to do whatever it wants behind a wall of silence. And that's when something interesting happened. Something that raises questions we still don't have good answers to. Someone tried to help from outside. You've probably heard of Starlink, right? Elon Musk's satellite internet company? Thousands of satellites orbiting Earth, beaming internet down to anyone with a receiver. Now imagine this. What if you could beam internet into a country that's been cut off, at least in some places, without relying on its normal phone towers and cables? It's technically possible. And some people started asking, should we do this for Iran? Should governments or private companies try to provide satellite access? It sounds like a no-brainer, until you hit the reality. In Iran, Starlink terminals are illegal, access can be patchy, and experts warn signals can be jammed. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really complicated. Is providing internet to a country against its government's wishes humanitarian aid or something else? Let me present the case for intervention first, because it's actually pretty compelling, and it's based on international human rights law. There's a principle called positive obligations. It says governments don't just have to avoid hurting people. They actually have to enable people to exercise their rights. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that's ICCPR, a major human rights treaty, guarantees freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. How can you have freedom of expression if you can't communicate? How can you assemble if you can't coordinate? Internet access enables those rights. Under this view, satellite internet isn't about destabilizing Iran. It's about restoring the minimum conditions for human rights to function. That's a big difference. Some scholars call this right-enabling technology. Technology that doesn't create new rights, but makes existing rights actually possible to use. Makes sense, right? But hold on. Let's hear the other side. Because there's a completely different way to look at this. And honestly, it's also pretty compelling. There's a fundamental principle in international law called non-intervention. Countries are supposed to stay out of each other's internal affairs. That's been bedrock since 1648. Here's the question. If the US government funds satellite internet to bypass Iranian government controls, isn't that interfering in Iran's internal affairs? And it's not just about legality. It's about what happens next. If outside powers can change a country's information environment, they're changing its politics too. Whether you intend it or not, giving protesters the ability to organize while the government can't stop them, that could topple a government. That's not nothing. And here's a darker question. Who decides which governments deserve to be destabilized? What criteria do we use? Who's making that call? There's actually a term for this kind of action. Military researchers call it gray zone operations. Not quite war, not quite peace. Something in between. Cyber operations, information campaigns, economic pressure, actions designed to achieve political goals without crossing the line into actual armed conflict. The problem? International law wasn't really designed for this stuff. The rules were written for a world of armies crossing borders, not satellites beaming data. So we're in this weird legal twilight zone. Is providing internet an act of aggression? Is it a use of force? Nobody really agrees. The law hasn't caught up. Okay, here's where I'm going to mess with your head a little bit, because I want you to really think about this. Ready for a thought experiment? Let's take everything we just discussed about Iran and apply it to China. Same logic, same principles, same human rights framework. See where it goes. China has the Great Firewall, one of the most sophisticated internet censorship systems ever built. Blocks Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Limits what 1.4 billion people can access. Chinese citizens have human rights too, right? Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom to access information. All the same rights as Iranians? So here's the question. Should the US government fund satellite internet to help Chinese citizens bypass the Great Firewall? Same logic applies, right? If internet access is a universal human right, and if outside help is legitimate when governments violate it, then yes. By that logic, we should help China too. But here's what's interesting. Almost nobody seriously proposes this. Can you guess why? Think about it for a second. What's different about China? The answer is power. Pure and simple. China is the world's second largest economy, a nuclear power, a permanent member of the UN Security Council. The costs of confronting China are enormous. Economic disruption, diplomatic fallout, potential military escalation. Nobody wants to pay that price. So we don't push it. Iran, much smaller, much weaker, much easier to confront. The costs are manageable, so suddenly human rights interventions seem more feasible, more attractive. This is what scholars call selective universality. We say rights are universal, but we only enforce them where it's convenient, where the costs are low. When Iran blocks the internet, it's a human rights crisis requiring intervention. When China does it, on a much larger scale, it's just how things are. Does that seem fair to you? Does it seem consistent? Or does it reveal something uncomfortable about how the world actually works? So let me bring this back to the core question, the one that started this whole conversation. Is internet access a universal human right? And the honest answer is, we say yes, but we act like no. We declare these rights universal, but we apply them selectively, based on politics, based on power. That doesn't mean the rights don't matter. They do. but it means we need to be honest about the gap between our principles and our practices. Because here's the thing, 85 million Iranians were cut off from the world this January. And while we debated the theory, real people suffered in silence. Protesters who couldn't coordinate, families who couldn't communicate, victims whose suffering went unrecorded. All while we had the technology to help, but didn't. Here's what I keep thinking about. We're living in an age where power increasingly flows through networks. Control the network, control the reality. In the 20th century, authoritarian power came from tanks and secret police. In the 21st century, it comes from servers and kill switches. And the really scary part? This technology is spreading. More and more governments are learning how to do what Iran did. Cut off their people when it matters most. So the question isn't just about Iran, it's about what kind of world we're building. One where connection is a right, or one where it's a privilege. I started this by telling you about a country that vanished from the internet. 85 million people, gone in an instant. And honestly, most of us barely noticed. That's maybe the most disturbing part. We've gotten so used to these stories that they barely register anymore. Another shutdown, another crisis, whatever, next. But somewhere in Tehran right now, there's someone who remembers those days of silence. Days when they didn't know if their family was safe. When nobody could hear them. And somewhere in a government building, there's someone who learned a lesson too. That when things get bad enough, you can always just pull the plug. So here's what I want to leave you with. Universal rights are only universal if we fight for them universally. Not just where it's easy, not just where it's cheap. If internet access is a human right, then it's a human right for Iranians and Chinese people and everyone else. Or it's not really universal at all. Having heard all this today, the blackout, the debates, the uncomfortable questions about how we apply our principles, what do you think? Where do you stand? Because honestly, I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think the question itself matters a lot. And I think we need to keep asking it. In the 21st century, power doesn't just flow from the barrel of a gun. It flows from the ability to connect or disconnect millions of people with a switch. That's today's story. Thanks for hearing it. Today's story ends here.